Hi there, everyone. Welcome to Democracy in 5 Minutes. I'm your host, Paul Manna. I'm a professor of government and public policy at William & Mary here in Williamsburg, Virginia. In today's episode, we'll discuss the role that institutions play in keeping democracies strong, and we'll explore how attacks on democracies often come in the form of attacks on those very institutions. Now, this is a huge topic, so we'll explore it today and also in the coming weeks so we can get into more of the details. That's the plan, so let's jump right in. I want to start with a metaphor that people often use when they discuss institutions in democracies. People sometimes call these institutions guardrails. What does that mean and why does the metaphor fit? Well, think about your own experiences where you've seen the effects of guardrails on your very life. Do you have some images that come to mind? What do these guardrails do? What have they done for you? Well, you may have thought of several different things. Perhaps most important is guardrails protect us from danger, and they're especially valuable when dangers might take us by surprise. For example, we might lose our balance for some reason while visiting a scenic site, and the guardrails prevent us from tumbling downhill or off a balcony, let's say, with a great view. They also can keep our cars on the road when an unexpected patch of ice might cause us to lose control, and our vehicle swerves towards the shoulder. In similar ways, institutions are key guardrails that protect democracies. The reason is that they can limit the damage that people might do when they try to hijack democracies to advance their own narrow ambitions. So let's unpack this guardrail metaphor so we can see how it works. I'll start by defining what I mean by institution. Many definitions of this term exist. Most agree that institutions include these sorts of things, such as the organizations in government that make decisions on certain topics. Congress, for example, is an institution of the U.S. government. Also, there are the working rules and procedures that define who gets to participate in those organizations and how they make decisions. So again, thinking about Congress, think about how members get elected, the rules and procedures that govern that, and think about the rules and procedures that govern the actual lawmaking that happens inside Congress. And then finally, there are also the broader set of laws, rules, and procedures that these governing institutions like Congress produce that affect the daily lives of people. Things like the Clean Air Act, appropriations bills that fund the government, the laws that govern Social Security and who is eligible for it. All these kinds of things are institutions that shape daily life here in the United States. Now, one could also ask, where do these institutions come from? In the US, the primary original source, I would say, is the US Constitution itself. The Constitution called into being the different branches of the federal government, for example, and it also created the nation's system of federalism that recognizes powers of the national government and the states. Those ideas of the different branches in federalism really are some of the bedrock governing institutions in the American system of democracy. So, what then makes these institutions guardrails that protect democracy? Well, as I alluded to earlier, perhaps their most important function is that they help keep ambitious politicians and government officials in check. We can all agree, I'd say, that politicians are ambitious people. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being ambitious, but too much ambition steered toward personal gain can be bad for a democracy. For that reason, the Constitution's authors built institutional guardrails into the nation's founding document. Their goal was to minimize the harm that ambitious individuals might be able to cause if they had unchecked power. That's why we have separate institutions of Congress, the presidency, and the courts all sharing power rather than operating independently. This design protects the rights of the people, and it also limits the potential for corruption. It also, as you could imagine, frustrates politicians sometimes because they want to try to act quickly to get their agendas moved forward, but these institutions can slow things down. Now, what does this all mean for you, and how can you use these ideas that we're discussing today? First, I would say recognize the important purposes that institutional guardrails provide, even if they might frustrate you at times. Having Congress, the president, and the courts share power can make government seem very slow and inefficient, and really that's simply just a byproduct of our constitutional design. It's a price we pay for wanting to live in a democracy and not a dictatorship. Second, ask yourself what would happen to American democracy if the president could operate unchecked, as President Trump is demonstrating that he actually likes to do. The deportations of alleged Venezuelan gang members to a brutal prison in El Salvador is a recent chilling example. Imagine if you were caught up in this process in a case of mistaken identity and you were accused of being one of these gang members, but you couldn't prove your innocence in court because the president has deported you and prevented your lawyers from challenging these actions. This would be very destructive to your own life, and this is the kind of damage that we can see when we ignore the guardrails that institutions like the courts can provide. So that's where I'd like to end today's episode. Looking ahead, we'll spend more time on this topic in the coming weeks to get into more specific examples, and I hope you'll tune in for those important discussions. In the meantime, take good care, folks, and I look forward to continuing our conversation next week.